guys! Today we're going to talk about how I made my Pirate Jester cosplay for Dragon Con of this year. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this specific piece of artwork, this was created by Black Slander over on Twitter. They designed this, I think, during one of the pirating arcs of the Mighty Nein story. I could be wrong, but it's been around for a hot minute. And when I stumbled across it, when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do for my Pirate Jester look, I immediately fell in love and decided I had to make this cosplay. I personally didn't really want to make her level 17 outfit. It has a little bit too much of like a racially ambiguous Halloween costume. Made me a little bit uncomfortable to wear it. So instead I decided for my pirate outfit that I would make this outfit instead. And I think it just really ties in the color scheme and the vibes of Jester a lot better. So without further ado, here is this cosplay tutorial. I'm sorry for the chaos that you are about to see. Pirate Jester's coat in this design is very odd because it has no sleeves at all, while also being completely off one shoulder and more wrapped around the back like a sash. It's a weird design. I love it because it's quirky, but this was the biggest thing that I had difficulty with when I first started on Pirate Jester. I created my own pattern by tracing a coat that I had previously purchased off Amazon and then taking that mock-up that I made and disassembling it to create the actual pattern I needed for Pirate Jester. From there, once I test fitted the mock-up and everything, I began cutting out the fabric. The fabric that I had gotten for Pirate Jester was just a bunch of curtains that I found at Goodwill for very, very inexpensively. And I wanted to use it because it had a really good color, as well as just having a nice pattern. The only issue with it was that it frayed a ton, but I'll explain more about that in a second, how I stopped that from happening. To make sure, I guess it's supposed to be like a lapel or something. It's the collar piece that kind of sticks out really far on Pirate Jester. To make sure that it actually stayed upright and didn't just flop around, I used a massive piece of interfacing that went from the top of the shoulder of that side of the coat all the way down to where the sash would be sitting in order to make it where that part of the jacket would stick up a little better. I normally don't talk during this kind of stuff, but I wanted to show y'all real quick. I've never figured out how to do an overlock stitch before. None of the tutorials I've ever seen have ever explained it in a way that either worked or made sense. But I just found this gal online. Her name is Jan Howell. Jan Howell, I love you. I'm gonna link her stuff. Anyway, so I figured out how to do an overlock. And this is so sturdy. This is not gonna come apart or fray or anything. But so what I'm going to do is I'm gonna do a straight stitch down to avoid from where I sewed my panels together so that you don't see that stitch. And then once I've done the straight stitch, I'm going to go back and clean up the little fuzzies that are like all over it right here. And then I'm going to overlock it. And that's going to be how I assemble this entire coat. I've already got half of it done. It's only 4 panels, so that's why. So I've got 2 panels assembled. I need to get the other ones attached and then I can do the bias tape. But guys, I'm so proud and I cannot wait to show you what this looks like. I struggled for a bit on how to finish the seams on the coat. Originally, I was going to purchase a bias tape that wound up never coming in. And by that point, I was already getting really frustrated with this coat because it frayed a ton. So what I wound up doing was cutting out pieces and strips of the coat, folding them over to essentially make my own bias tape and create a rolled hemmed edge that I could use for the coat that sealed all of the outside edge of the coat. So any kind of fraying that would happen would be stuck on the inside of this little bias tape edge without any worry about it getting like fraying anymore. And then for the inside, I learned how to do an overlock stitch and just essentially went back and forth with that to make it where it would stop fraying so much. It's not perfect. If I had a serger, it would be much better, but that's way out of my price range right now, so that's what I stuck with. To create the gold trim that I have for around the entire coat, I bought a vinyl gold trim off Amazon. I had to get about 2 or 3 packages of this because it was very finicky to use. It's definitely one of those that once you sew into it, there's no way to undo those stitches because it permanently marks it. So the first try I did, I really messed up the piece and I had to completely unstitch all of the gold trim and then buy some more and redo it. But in the end, it worked out really, really well. I just had to be super careful and super slow when I sewed it on. To make the trim itself a little bit more flexible, I did iron it to make it so it would have a little bit more give. This was a tip that was given to me by my friend Sarah. Totally go check her out. She's an incredible cosplayer. The white shirt that I have underneath Pirate Jester is actually my aunt's white shirt that she had given to me to use for whatever I wanted. I cut off the bottom half of the shirt and I stitched an enormous amount of this bridal tablecloth that I had purchased off Amazon for really, really cheaply. But essentially just the lace would go all the way around and then multiple layers of lace specifically in the front where it wasn't as easy to see through it with the one layer. From there, I completely removed one entire shoulder to create the weird little like trim frill that it has on the shoulder that's missing the side without the jacket shoulder. And I just took a piece of the sleeve itself and sewed it back onto that, but ruffled it a bit. For the other sleeve, I cut off half the sleeve and then took more of that tablecloth that I had that was the lace and just sewed all that on. And everything's covered because the seams look terrible because, again, I don't have a serger, and at some point I was just really fed up with doing all of the sewing on this. It was very frustrating. But for the sleeve, in order to cover up the seam where you can see where the tablecloth meets the t-shirt, there is just a band of leather that I cut off the leather coat that I used for all my leather for the cosplay. To make the bracer, I literally just took a sleeve off of the leather coat, cut that in half so I had the correct length that I needed. One side of it was already hemmed because it's just the bottom of the sleeve, whereas the top part I had to hem it down. To create the details that are on top of the little bracer thing itself, I cut out additional strip of the leather, and then I did a stitch across the entire thing to create a fake stitching line because I knew that I wasn't going to be able to actually fully stitch all of that down, because I very quickly realized for all of the leather stuff, essentially, I was going to have to hand stitch it. Very difficult. I snapped so many needles having to do that, but it was worth it in the end. So I hand stitch each part of the circular end of these little strips down onto the bracer. The middle part is just free hanging. And then hand sewed buttons on that were to kind of help hold it all down. To add on the lace that's at the end, I took another strip of that bridal tablecloth that I had and just stitched that around the edge really, really easily. And then to create that pleated back end, I took a strip off of a piece of fabric that I already had to create a double folded little strip of stuff. I used the overlock stitch to create a sealed edge and then sewed that down when I did the hemming work for the bracer itself. And then to make everything stay very nicely on my arm, all I did was create a little elastic loop with a piece of Velcro and a little piece of foam that attaches to the inside of the bracer, and that holds it on my arm perfectly. The corset top was honestly what took me the longest with this cosplay. I created the entire thing using the traditional duct tape method of patterning, where I wrap myself in saran wrap and then I duct taped, or I used masking tape, and then drew on the shape of the corset that I needed. It's entirely kind of faked. There's no boning in it because this is leather. I didn't want to have to deal with adding an entire different layer of structure. And because the shape of it, it didn't need to have the boning in it to help make the shape. It's just kind of there. I don't know how to better explain it than that. But it's more like a fake corset than anything, and then obviously like the little black piece is very much fake as well to create the illusion of an additional like corset layer underneath. Once I had created the pattern, I then sat down and created a foam 2mm EVA base, which I hot glued together because I didn't care how bad that looked. Contact cement also doesn't work super well with 2mm when you're trying to join individual pieces together. It's too thin. I then sat there with the coat and tried as best as I could to get all of the pieces that I needed for this leather outer covering of the foam layer. And at some point I realized I wasn't going to be able to do it perfectly, that there was going to be stitching lines visible from the actual original coat, that it's not going to all line up perfectly, and I just went with the flow. So I really went with that like it's been put together kind of mentality with this, because I also didn't really have any other way to do it. I did so much hand sewing to get the stupid outer leather layers down onto the EVA foam. I used a quilting spray to kind of stick everything together and then just hand stitched a ton of it. My hands were in so much pain. This is legitimately why it took the longest, was because of having to do that. And I kept snapping needles because of how many layers of leather I was having to go through. Because in some spots, because of the pre-stitching that already existed on the leather coat, I was sewing between 2 to 5 layers of leather plus the EVA foam. But once it was all finished, I added some grommets to the back. I had some black ribbon that was left over from something, and I just laced that all up. The collar that's actually on the cosplay itself is the collar straight off the coat of the jacket that I used. And then I just sewed on that gold trim to match the gold trim that was already on the coat, so everything had that uniform feeling to it. For the little fake black leather pieces, they're literally just tiny little pieces that I had drawn on the original pattern. It's the same method of EVA foam with pleather on top of it. And then I hot glued that on directly to the brown corset part, and then just added the lacing and the grommets onto that. To create the collar was really difficult because I didn't want to use starched fabric, because I didn't want to have to deal with the blue body paint bleeding through to the other side of the fabric. So I created a Warbler base in the rough pattern of what I needed, and then slowly heated it up and molded it to my throat in order to get it to where it would sit right and also have that bend curve of like the almost petal-like structure of the collar. Once I had finished that, I painted the entire thing white, and then I added the lace that I just like very, very quickly hot glued on and then tamped it down. In order to get the collar to attach though, it's just a couple of grommets in the back, laced together and tied onto my neck. It fits very, very well without choking me. To make all of the gold details, I rolled out a bunch of Warbler sticks and then just slowly assembled it into the shape of the collar, painted that gold completely, added the little red gem that I made out of EVA foam, and then attached that directly with hot glue to the white lace Warbler collar. And then for the final main part was the horns. I purchased the patterns off Etsy. This is actually my favorite horn pattern that I've ever used. I'll link it down below if you're interested in it, but I really, really liked it. It came out very clean. I normally have a lot of difficulty with horn patterns. I'm probably going to keep working with this specific person's patterns because I loved how everything sat really, really easily. Once I had created the entire base 4mm EVA foam shape, I then sat there for about 3 hours and slowly covered it with foam clay rings. I had a lot of foam clay left over from some projects I had been working on, and I could tell that it was getting a little old, so I wanted to use it up as much as possible. It worked really well for this. It was a very messy process of just having to make sure that I kept the foam clay wet and that I kept going back and slowly smoothing everything out so it didn't get squished as I was working on it. I think I let it sit for about 3 days before I dremeled in any kind of wear and tear or additional textures to it because I wanted to make sure that everything dried super duper well. Once I did that, I had to figure out how to attach it to my head, and I wound up, to the judgment of many of my peers and friends, hot gluing it directly onto a headband. And you know what? It worked really well, so I think my method worked out fine. Once it was hot glued to the headband, I painted everything brown, went back over it with some black in order to weather it, and then I used a gold spray paint. It's the exact same spray paint that I used for the traveler symbol. I wanted those colors to match to create the uniformity in the cosplay. I sprayed a little bit of the spray paint in like a tiny little cup and would sit there and hand paint it on, and I think it worked really, really well to give it that nice burnished almost texture. Once that was finished, I added the final accessories, which were the red strips of fabric, which were part of a tablecloth that my mom found at a thrift store. And I just kind of cut those up and weathered the edges a little bit, tied those on around the individual horns, and then hot glued it a little bit to just keep it where it would sit correctly. And then I created the chains that drape across. I'm probably going to redo those because I don't like how they look, but it's essentially just one giant chain that's hot glued from one tip of the horn to the other, and then another chain that's just looped through that one in order to hang down, and then the 3 little gems are just attached at the end of each of those loops. To create the feather headpiece that is included with Jester's stuff, I legitimately just got a hair clip, attached some wire to it, put a little bit of Warbler around the wire to stabilize it more, and then just hot glued a ton of feathers at random all over it. The feathers were purchased off Amazon. I got the ones that looked the most similar to the art that I could find. I trimmed some as necessary to make it fit a little bit better. And then I just covered that hair clip with the feathers. And that's Pirate Jester. This is the 9th Jester Lavore cosplay I have in my arsenal. I don't have a problem, I promise. I don't have that many more on my list, only about 4. I have a problem. But I really enjoyed making this costume. I will say, never do what I did. I did not get to try this outfit on until the day before DragonCon this year, which was very, very stressful. I legitimately did not know if I was even going to like this outfit, which was not great because we had a photo shoot lined up, and then I had also promised to do all of this with Meg, so it was like, if this fell through, I was going to be the worst friend ever. And then I was also just going to hate myself because I spent so much time and energy and money making this, which honestly speaking, I didn't spend that much on it because so much of it was thrifted, but still, do not recommend. Try out your outfits at least a month before the convention if you can, so that you can make changes as needed. As always, if you have any questions, leave them down below in the comments. And if you're interested in seeing more about Pirate Jester, check it out over on Instagram and TikTok, where I've been posting a ton about her and just the general process of making her, as well as all the pretty finished pictures. Part 2, all about the props, will be up soon. If you're interested in the patterns for both the corset top and the coat, they will be available on Patreon as soon as I can get to them. I've been really, really busy lately because of work and stuff, so I'm really hoping to get to them possibly next weekend. Fingers crossed. But check them out there if you'd like to purchase them. I will have them available, as well as just general instructions on how I made this. The Pirate Jester pattern, though, will not include the wacky, like, collar coat and half shoulder thing on. It will be the full pattern for the coat itself, minus the sleeves that I used to create this. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.